Today's lovely episode is episode 10 of Man Who Thinks podcast. This is going to be an episode on what I learned from being contrarian. Contrarian, I just looked it up, obviously comes from early 14th century. Contrary as the root. Contrarian meaning the person who is acting in the opposite form compared to those around. Contrarian, for me, has been an eye-opening experience. The idea of being contrarian first came to me when I realized that people were getting paid to jump out of planes and helicopters, record it, and post it on YouTube. My first experience being a contrarian, it's been really my whole life. That's the exact reason why I got to the point where I am, and how people like Sam Kolder and Jacob and Matt Komo were people that I would watch on YouTube. Very contrarian of me, I had to ask for permission to have YouTube. Very interestingly enough, I first gravitated to the simple things like how to beat this level in Lego Star Wars, and eventually I got into the whole making art and creating things with cameras, and that's how you get to see Kolder and you get to see Jacob and all these great and fantastic people, Yoon Olsen even. And so when I realized, like, wow, these people are doing something that is, in its most literal sense, the opposite of what I had grown up to know life to be, it was that simple. It was how do I do that? I was just telling Farmer George on Friday that my next podcast episode, this episode, is going to be about being contrarian. He first annotated it to financial stocks and investments and things of that nature. My reason for putting it here as an episode is on the side of, if by definition listening to yourself is contrarian, which inevitably is the opposite of what I knew growing up to be, then by definition, being a contrarian is not necessarily following in the opposite of what is considered popular or at the focus or center of attention, but instead is following what you feel is right. So I'm not going to sway you in what you think contrarian is. I'm more so opening up the discussion to say, being contrarian is more about going into yourself. Because I have grown up in a public society, in a public school system, where, in my own perspective of it, people aren't really taught to believe in themselves. And I'm 24. And for the last 5 months, I've taken myself seriously to the extent that listening to myself is the forefront of my mind. And having 5 months, so today, this is recorded on June 1st, 2025. I'm 5 months sober. And if I had to pick a day where it was, okay, this is the first day that I get to pick up an entirely new book, go on blank page number 1 and start writing, it'd be this right now, today, this experience. The notion of contrarian and how it relates to me and why I care about it is that if you keep doing what has been recommended to you, then the results you're going to get are common. And if by definition what I have desired for life isn't necessarily the most common thing, having the experience that I've had and seeing things that I've seen, then that's great for me for one particular reason. And I wrote this in a comment to Mr. Brian Withers, that when you realize that you are the contrast in it of itself, it's an amazing experience. So how does contrarian and being contrast? They're the same thing. Being the contrast of life, in my own experience, is everything that I am at this moment is something that some guy 5 years ago who was sitting on a balcony looking at a giant sequoia tree, redwood tree, or whatever pine tree those might have been. I'm that person right now, today, at this very moment. And that person who was looking, imagine this, dug a hole back to the ground, looking up, saying, that guy that is speaking to the camera on June the 1st, 2025, that's the person that I want to be. That's the person that I'm going to be. That's the person that I am. So being contrarian is a mode of self-respect, even. The concept that you can look intangibly recognize one versus the other and discern the differences between the two, finding the contrast. And then in it of itself be a walking flame of that same contrast is a version of life that I knew I was going to live. I just didn't ever guess that the details would have ever have been this sweet. Being contrarian is the idea that you understand what you're going to get, how to get there, and knowing that there is a total sacrifice in what you're leaving behind, giving up, moving away from, choosing not to do. And I wrote that probably, when did I write that? 2024. I wrote that 15 months ago. So no. Yeah, 14 months ago. We'll wrap up by saying this. My version of being contrarian and why it relates to Brian Withers and why it relates to the person I was 5 years ago is that being contrarian isn't running up to someone and being like, oh, I'm the opposite of you. Or, hey, my life is better than you for X, Y, and Z reason. My version of contrarian is understanding that the world is what it's supposed to be, but I also have the chance to choose my own. And it's not that choosing my own is meant to be the opposite of what other people are doing. But if we were to stop and reflect and look at the world the way it is in a very simple and honest sense, if the world is in chaos, turmoil, that isn't the world that I prescribe to anymore. So, because I chose to look on the contrary side of things, of a world full of peace and serenity, harmony, I have experienced a completely different way of life. So because my way of life has now changed, I can also recognize the contrast in a very humbling way where I can say, first off, I'm going to treat the rest of the world in the same way that I treat myself. Furthermore, I'm going to take the chance to say, okay, this person might not have thought the same thoughts that I have thought. We might not think about the same things the same way. And so because of that, I'm going to take myself out of the equation and respect this person as if they were me from 5 years ago, with patience, with acceptance. That's what being contrarian is to me. Being contrarian is realizing that when I walk into a home, realizing that that might not be the home that I might live in, but somebody lives in that house. And when somebody who is essentially saying, hey, this is the way I live, why would I judge them? If I was them, if someone was coming into my home, I'm not going to sit there caring whether they're judging me or not, because I wouldn't judge myself. That to me is being contrarian. Obviously, it's all semantics, cheek and tongue. But what it also is a feeling. Being contrarian is learning to accept what you want as a desire, and also accepting that you're going to forego everything else because whatever you're choosing is clearly the right thing for you. So that's all I have to say about being on the contrary side of things. We'll go on to the next episode. Take care. All the best.